Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. So I am going to do a little housekeeping before we get started on our tour today. If we could just look at our audio. Actually, give me 1 second. I'm going to share a screen for you, which will make it easier with some instructions. Again, hello, I'm Mara Walsh. I'm your host today. But before we get started, I want to share a few housekeeping details. Your audio, if you're not hearing us or you're not hearing us well, you can do one of three things. You can attach a headset or earbuds. That's the best way to hear us on any device. You can turn up your computer audio, or you can also adjust your Zoom microphone, or I'm sorry, not your Zoom microphone, but your Zoom audio settings. By using the output volume from the speaker icon on the Zoom toolbar. Your screen, if you would like to see the screen in the best way possible, you can enlarge the presentation screen by moving the vertical bar closest to the speaker, which is me at this point, so that the presentation part, or the slide in this case, is showing the most on the most of your screen. If you're using a device like an iPad or an iPhone, or a smartphone, you can swipe so that you're seeing the presentation and not the speaker. Okay, so hopefully those few things will get you optimized well for this tour so that your technology is working the best it can. And right now, I'm going to go for, okay, I just changed my slides. Sorry, for some reason the slides are being delayed today. I'm not sure exactly why. So I'm going to share a little bit about myself before I hand over the microphone or the computer. My name is Mara Walsh. I'm in the USA, specifically between Philadelphia and New York. I started leading physical tours with my travel partners, EF Tours, as a Girl Scout leader. And every summer I take Girl Scouts, their friends and their family on international destinations. And I have expanded this travel program to include adults and also family-friendly tours. So I have a lot of adult-only tours and family-friendly tours as well. In nearly all of my tours, I partner with EF Tours or their adult division, which is called Go Ahead Tours. There are a couple reasons I started these virtual tours, and I started them back in May after the COVID travel restrictions hit us hard. One, I really wanted to support our tour director community during this time of no work, since we're not able to travel. And two, I really wanted to keep the excitement of travel alive for my travel group and extend that opportunity to those who have learned about us through their friends, their family, social media, and other means. We've done several tours in the past week. If you've missed them and you'd like to go back and view the recording, you can do so by going to girltraveltours.com/virtual-tours. You can get there by my website, which is on the slide attached to this. And there's a virtual tours drop-down menu, which you could just hit on, and then you can have access to all the past tours. We do also have a YouTube channel, so if you're interested in viewing them on YouTube, you can do that as well. We have several tours coming up in the future. Next week, we have Transylvania to celebrate Halloween. We have Japan, the Highlands of Scotland, Alaska, Vienna, Berlin, the Canadian Rockies, and then we're going to start the new year with Gaudi's Barcelona. I have tons more that are in the works for 2021. So if you are enjoying these virtual tour presentations, by all means, keep your eye on my website and sign up for the ones that you're interested in. As long as you're interested in viewing them, we'll continue to produce them. So as I said, girltraveltours.com, it's on the slide. You can go there to the virtual tour drop-down menu. But today, instead of talking about the future tours, we're going to talk about the tour we have at hand today. And we are going to be off to Germany today. Before we get going, I want to share a few ways for you to interact with us during this event. One, feel free to ask questions about the tour and the tour director by using the Q&A link in the Zoom toolbar. If you're on Facebook, you can put it in the comments and I'll try my best to go back and forth between Facebook and Zoom and address some of those questions from both venues. We'll have a Q&A session after the tour. And so you can feel free to ask questions as we go along during the tour, and we'll take note of them. You can also use the chat feature. If you need to communicate with me directly, this is the place to do it, and I'll address as many of those chat questions as I can as we go along. I'd also like to interact a little bit with everybody on the Zoom call just to see what your familiarity is with Germany. So I'm going to launch a poll right now. You can participate by going to fill out the poll. If you don't see the poll, there's a little more button on the bottom of your toolbar. You can click it and go to polls. So what is your connection to Germany? I've been and I love it. I have a trip booked. I plan to go in the future. I have no current plans, but I may in the future, or I'm solely interested in experiencing virtual travel. Okay, so right now we have about 50% of the people who have chimed in on the polls from our Zoom call. I'm gonna wait until that goes up a little bit. Right now, it looks like a lot of people have been to Germany and they love it. So let's end this poll and share the results with the audience. So we have about 43% of people who have been to Germany before, and we have a bunch of people who are undecided about going in the future. So I'm going to stop sharing that. I'm going to move on. So that brings us to the fact that it really doesn't matter how much you know about the region at this point. I can guarantee you that we will enhance your knowledge of Germany today through this virtual call. And as you all know, or some of you for the first time will learn, a tour would never be complete without a fantastic tour director. A tour director is like a personal travel concierge who stays with the group from start to finish and shares a world of knowledge, manages all your travel plans, and makes sure your experience is stressless and full of positive experiences, allowing you to make lifelong memories. These are by far the most important people when you have group travel. And if we're not traveling, these tour directors have no work. I'll share with you in the chat as we go along and the Q&A how you can tip the tour director if you're so inclined. All the tips go directly to the tour director once they're collected. I'm hoping that this virtual tour will not only reignite our travel desire, but allow a tour director to do what he does best and share his knowledge and passion for travel. We've really hit a great niche here with a win-win-win situation. We have tour directors who are doing what they love. We have them making some money on the side to supplement the fact that they have not made any money since most of them a full year ago at this point. And for all of us travelers and people who love to learn about different cultures and regions, we've been fulfilled as well. So it's a win-win-win. But before I hand over the event to our tour director, I know many of you found our virtual events through Facebook, and I just want to say quickly that I just want to warn everybody here that there are several relentless and unscrupulous people on Facebook trying to promote fake events by copying legitimate events and pages. And they put links in our events as well as create their own events, and they try to get people to provide credit cards. Please, please, please never give a credit card to enter a free virtual event, and know that that's something wrong. So exit as soon as and if that happens to you. My virtual tour presentations do not require credit cards to join, and you can always safely access our events through my webpage, girltraveltours.com, or through our Facebook page. Make sure you're on facebook.com/girltraveltours, because they copy it exactly. So it's extremely hard to know the difference. Okay, enough of that. Let's get back to our tour at hand tonight. So you can expect an amazingly educational and fun trip to Germany. We're lucky today to have a wonderful tour director back with us who's done at least one tour and maybe two this summer. And we're lucky to have the fact that he is an expert in Germany. I am honored to introduce you to and hand over this event to our amazing tour director, Louis, who I'm going to stop sharing my screen to give it over to Louis, and he's going to take over from here. Welcome, Louis.
Hi everybody. Hold on 2 seconds. And here we should hopefully be on. Yes, I think we're good. Hi, everybody. My name is Lewis Urban. I've been an EF tour director for, I guess, 11 years now. I'm originally from Scotland. I'm from Edinburgh, but I lived in Glasgow for about 10, 11 years. And 2 years ago, I moved to Marseille in the south of France, which is where I am just now. And what a very strange year we're all having, not being able to work and not being able to travel like we're used to. I'm calling you tonight from here. It's about 11 o'clock. We're 2 hours into our curfew. So we now have a curfew because of coronavirus. Everybody has to be in their homes from 9 o'clock. So it's been a real huge source of, it's been great to be able to work this year doing these guided tours. I did one of Edinburgh and I did one of Prague. Not just as Mara says to work, but also that's hugely important, and we're all very grateful to Mara for organizing these, but also because that helps me to get a little bit out of my bubble here and imagine that I'm also traveling. I'm used to my job taking me around the world for half of the year each year, and to suddenly not have that, it's a bit miserable. So I'm very happy to show you around Munich, talk a little bit about Bavaria this evening. So my plan is I'm going to talk for, I think, about 40 minutes, something like 40 minutes. And I'm going to show you lots and lots of images. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the region in general where Munich is, which is called Bavaria. And then I'm going to take you on a walking tour in the city of Munich with 4 main stops and some sort of snack stops, as it were. And then I'm going to tell you about some other things in the sort of general Munich region that are interesting to visit. And at the end, we're going to make lots and lots of time for questions. Okay, so yeah, we're going to start. We're looking at this photo here where we can see the kind of skyline of Munich, and we can see in the background the Alps. I have to say, if I'm honest, I feel like this photo has been photoshopped. I've never personally seen a view of the Alps from Munich, but it makes quite a nice image and reminds us how close the city of Munich is, in fact, to the Alps. So we're going to, hold on. Here we go. So we're going to start by just having a little look at this map just to get us started. I'm going to say that Germany is not the biggest sort of land country in Europe. In terms of population, it's very, very much the biggest. So we've got nearly 90 million people living in Germany, which is quite a massive population for an area that's about the size of Montana, to contextualize that for those of you in the US. It's made up, as you can see in this map, of 16 states. And it's a kind of federal democracy, right? So in each of these states, they have their own sort of regional control. They have some autonomy over regional issues, but then they also have a centralized government in Berlin. You can also see, although I have to say it is hard to see in this map, but around some of these provinces, the green one, the brown one, the purple one, etc., you can see a kind of slightly more dotted line, and that's in fact where Germany was partitioned after World War II. So some of East Germany becoming under control of the Soviets, and West Germany becoming under the control of the Allies. So we're looking at this map, and we're trying to imagine that, in fact, in Germany, within the whole of Germany, there's so many sort of diverse, different landscapes. You have lowlands in the north, you have uplands in the center, and then in the south, where we're going to be going this evening, you have the Bavarian Alps. But in general, you have 1/3 of the country which is covered with forest. Okay, so you have really a lot of forests. It's known also, Germany, for having a very, very high quality of life. So after the USA, people don't always know this, but after the USA, Germany is the #2 most popular destination to live in the world. So people really, really want to emigrate to Germany. And Munich is one of the cities in Germany that's said to have the highest quality of life. So what that means is there's very good healthcare, very low unemployment, good social security, free access to college. It's a sort of high quality of life and living. And so I want to think about some general things that we think about when we think about Germany. I think one of the first things that we think about is sort of natural landscapes and scenery. So we think about sort of Alps and lakes and forests and sort of the countryside, as it were. I think a lot of, certainly Americans, think about Christmas markets, right? This is the Christmas market in Nuremberg, which is in Bavaria. We think about manufacture. And it's true that, in fact, Germany has been absolutely a powerhouse in terms of manufacture and production of cars, electrical goods, electrical appliances, that kind of stuff. And in fact, if you think, so many of the sort of leading car brands also that you have in the US come from Germany: BMW, Audi, Mercedes, Volkswagen. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a very big center for car production amongst other industries. Huge for sort of manufacturing in general, and also for technology. Sausages. This is got to be a thing that most people think about when they think about going to Germany. For those of you that don't know, the person that's holding this delicious looking sausage in this photo is Angela Merkel, who is the Chancellor of Germany. That's kind of like the president. And so just this last little thing for the introduction, just to look at this and look at this statistic that the GDP is more than 2.4 trillion. So Germany's economy is actually super, 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 super powerful. So in the sort of world scales, it's only behind the US, China, and Japan. So I don't know if everyone knew that, but I always find that's quite a striking statement. So it's only after China, the US, and Japan. It's the fourth most powerful economy really in the world. And if every different country in Europe has its different roles to play in the European Union, the role that Germany plays is very much the sort of industrial and manufacturing powerhouse, okay, in the center. It's boundaried by, but shares a border with 9 different countries, Germany. Okay, so if you imagine, it's really sort of centrally placed in Europe, and it has a very, very, very strong economy. So it has a powerful role to play in the European Union, in the way that, for example, France plays a big role in culture production, or the UK plays a big role in financial services. Germany, it's really sort of manufacture is one of the very big things that they do. So if we go back to this map just for 2 seconds, and we look down in the bottom, we see this blue state, okay, Freistaat Bayern. Bayern is the name for Bavaria in Germany, and that's where we're gonna go today. So hold on. Voila. So here's a bit of a more zoomed in version of Bavaria. So you can see there's a few big cities, but the sort of most important city in Bavaria, and the one that we're going to talk about today, is Munich. You see also in this image that here we have the blue and white, which is the characteristic colors of Bavaria. And I think in general, to say some very general things about Bavaria, Bavaria is known as being a bit more traditional. Okay, there's about 13 million people in Bavaria. So it's one of the really big sort of powerful states of Germany. And it's a more traditional, more Catholic state than some of the more northern states in Germany. And so I wanted to ask about some of the sort of general stereotypes, or I wanted to show you some of the general things that I think people think of when they think about Munich. So when thinking about Bavaria, so here on this flag, this slide also, you can see the European flag on the right-hand side, the German flag on the left, and the Bavarian flag in the middle. So here is a sort of typical Bavarian medieval village. This is one of the first things I think people think of when they think about Bavaria. They think about these very old-fashioned sort of, middle-aged and medieval style buildings with these sort of wooden lattices and these sort of stone towers, very Romanesque looking stone towers. And so it's true that Bavaria has a lot of sort of very cute, small-sized cities and towns which have these medieval old towns in the center. That's one thing. I think the Alps and sort of lakes and a sort of quite outdoor, healthy lifestyle, you know, like canoeing, hill walking, BMXing. There's a huge industry around of tourism around people coming to Munich and to Bavaria in general to do sort of outdoor sports. So I think that's a really big part of it. Lederhosen. So if you see these old guys having a good time, Lederhosen is a big sort of stereotype. I think a lot of Americans in general have the stereotype about Lederhosen in Germany, but Lederhosen really is much more of a thing in the south than in general in Germany. And so there's still quite a big culture of Lederhosen in Bavaria. And in fact, these were traditional sort of workers and peasant trousers. So if you worked and lived in the countryside, you know, hundreds of years ago, or you were a hunter, these would be the clothes that you would wear to work. They were very sort of practical. And in fact, traditional lederhosen, they're made of deer skin. Okay, so it's very, very durable. It's expensive to produce. And in fact, it's the kind of thing where they would get passed down generations. So you could have 3 generations that shared the same lederhosen. In the 19th century, when you had the rise of the bourgeoisie and more of a sort of middle class culture in the south of Germany, there was a huge decline and people stopped wearing them. But the last 100 years or so, it's come back a lot. And now it's a bit of like a kind of special occasion thing. You know, maybe you would wear it for a wedding or for a funeral or something like that. Okay. Here's some more people wearing lederhosens and dirndls, which is the sort of female version of the lederhosen. I think also people think about Bavaria and they think about food, right? They think about pretzels, they think about sausages, they think about beer. These are all things that we are going to come back to later on the tour, so I'm not going to get too involved right now, other than to tell you that 40% of all of Europe's breweries are in Bavaria. So what is actually a very small place produces a huge, huge, huge percentage of the beer that we drink in Europe. And there's 667 breweries in Bavaria. So that's really huge, huge, huge number. And the Benedictine monastery at Wiensteffen is the oldest licensed brewer in the world. They've been brewing since 1040. Okay, so that's really just shy of 1,000 years. Okay, so here we go. We're looking at a slide of Munich, and we're going to actually start talking a little bit about Munich itself, the city. Okay, so Munich, in fact, Germans don't call it Munich, they call it München, okay, which is like this. It's like München, which comes from the monks. Okay, so there were a lot of monks, a lot of abbeys, a lot of friars around the Munich area. Okay, and in fact, Munich essentially got founded in the sort of 12th century. There was a big market, sort of crossroads where people could come to trade. Okay, and there was a Duke of Bavaria who granted a license to a market in the 1200s, and that's what generally today we count as the sort of beginning of Munich as we know it. These days, it's a big sort of bustling metropolitan city with about 1.5 million people in it. Here's a sort of bit of an aerial view of the city. That's Marienplatz. That's where we're going to go later on our tour today. And here's another sort of aerial view. I really like this one. This sort of captures that you can have this kind of quite wintry, sort of crisp, foggy air in Munich a lot, which is really nice to visit in wintertime. It's not just old buildings, and I mean, here's also there's some really amazing museums. Another thing in Munich, this is the Deutsche Museum. It's a museum to sort of technology and engineering. It's also several really interesting art galleries. There's also the Olympic Stadium. Quite famously, there was the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich, and they were the Olympics that were very overshadowed. Maybe some of you watching will be old enough to remember that there was a very significant high-profile Palestinian terror attack during the 1972 Olympics. And in fact, 9 members of the Israeli Olympic teams were captured and taken hostage by a Palestinian organization. And then there was quite an unpleasant attempt to rescue the hostages, in which most of the hostages were killed, and also most of the terrorists. It's actually a Steven Spielberg film about the aftermath, if any of you have seen it. So the 1972 Olympics aren't really remembered in Munich as being a time when, someone ran really, really fast for Germany, but more overshadowed by this quite horrible thing that happened. Some other sort of big buildings and sites that are around in Munich that people like visiting. This is BMW World. BMW, in fact, BMW, Bavarian Motor Works. Okay, so it's really from Bavaria. And so this is their kind of, they have a showroom. It's kind of like a museum of the history of BMW. This is another thing people like to do. And here's the Englischer Garden, which is one of the big public parks in Munich where a lot of people go to swim and spend time. Yes, that is a naked man, just this side of the river. I included it for a reason, just because often people are shocked, especially people that come from the UK or people that come from the United States. They're quite shocked that Germans have this really sort of frank relationship towards nudity. So really often you'll see sort of people naked swimming or sunbathing with not very many clothes on. People have a bit of a sort of no-nonsense relationship to it. Us in the UK, for example, no way. People are too prudish, but Germans have a very sort of matter-of-fact relationship to that kind of stuff. And then last of all, I have just a little slide about a beer hall and beer hall culture, which obviously makes up one of the very, very important parts of the culture in Germany. We're going to come back to this much more later on in the tour, and we're going to talk about the role that beer halls fill in the life of Munich. But for now, that's a little bit of introduction of sort of some general things that Munich has to offer. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go a bit more into the specifics, and we're going to go on a bit of a walking tour of Munich. Okay. And so we're going to do 4 main stops: the Marienplatz, the Feldherrnhalle, the Hofbrauhaus, the Viktualienmarkt, and then we're going to look at some surrounding sites. So what we're looking at right now is Marienplatz. So this is the sort of really important central square in the old city center of Munich. All right, it was founded in 1158. And so in the Middle Ages, this was the grain market. So in the Middle Ages, very, very often, towns grew up in places where there were markets, places of exchange. Okay. These days, there are still some kinds of markets. There's the Christmas market, which happens here. But for the Middle Ages, this was very much the grain market of Munich. And you have here on your left this grand building, the Neue Rathaus, which is the new town hall. And you have in the distance the small white building with the kind of triangular roof, and that is the Altes Rathaus, the old town hall. So here's a kind of more high up picture where you can get a better look at the new town hall, and an even better one where it's looking very atmospheric in the sort of snow. Now, obviously, this is a very impressive, sort of grand, dramatic facade of a building. And in fact, it's a building with 400 rooms, 6 courtyards, really, really massive. And it gives the impression that it's very old. You can even see in the tower, there's some Gothic touches, there's some gargoyles. You know, it's showing off this building, isn't it? It's trying to say, look at us, we're very impressive, we're very old. In fact, most of this building dates to the 19th century. And even more sort of interestingly, in World War II, really a lot of this building was destroyed. And so most of this is remodeling done from the 1950s and the 1960s. In general, that's the case with a lot of Munich. A lot of it was destroyed in World War II. And then rebuilt afterwards. So there is very, very little stuff that's actually very genuinely old in Munich, apart from some of the breweries. And so on this front of this building, you can actually kind of see it there. If you look in the tower, there's a kind of green bit of sort of oxidized copper on the left. And then you can see in there, there's this quite amazing sort of moving showpiece. Okay, it's the 5th largest sort of working clockwork in Europe. And it's this big system with 43 different bells that plays this music. And these men, they dance in circles. And on the layer above them, there's a jousting competition where the Duke of Bavaria wins and he knocks someone off his horse. Okay, and it lasts for quite a while. I find it quite creepy. I find glockenspiels, those kind of moving things in church towers that you have a lot in Central Europe, I find them quite creepy in general. But anyway, it's quite beautiful also, all of these bells and this music, and it happens several times a day, I think at midday and at 5 p.m. And so usually there's crowds and crowds of tourists who are all standing up looking at the glockenspiel and trying to see it do its little performance, which they change fairly regularly. And that's been going since the beginning of the 20th century. If we're standing with our back to this building, if we're standing looking at this and then we turned around, we'd see this church building, which is Peterskirche. It's quite difficult. I don't know if you can tell from this picture, it's quite difficult to get a good picture of this church because the problem is that it's so close to all of the buildings around it. So when you're too close to all the buildings around it, you can't really get the perspective of a big sort of square to take a picture of it or something like this. But you can see anyway, this is Peterskirche. It's a church which dates from the 1200s and was rebuilt in the 1300s after there was a big fire which devastated Munich. Okay, it's got 8 bells in the church tower, the smallest of which was called the bell for poor sinners, which was in fact the bell that announced when there was going to be an execution in Marienplatz. So back in the Middle Ages, in a lot of Europe, executions were really sort of the most popular form of entertainment. So there wasn't sort of, there was no TV or anything like this. So people would all gather together. The family would come. It'd be a big day out to go and watch local criminals or notables or maybe even a celebrity getting their head chopped off. And so that would be announced from this church. Just a little note on architecture that you can see that the style of this church is really it's Bavarian Romanesque outside. Okay, so Romanesque architecture is the style of architecture which comes before Gothic. So it's like the 6th century to the 11th century, and you can really see in the far side of this church this kind of round, sort of quite squat, solid building with a kind of conical roof. That's really sort of classic Romanesque architecture. But then what's really amazing is that when you go inside it, you have this super gaudy, over-the-top Baroque. Okay, so you have all of this gold, you have these frescoes in the ceiling, you even have the skeleton of a saint, which is adorned with sort of rubies and jewels. So you have this very strange mishmash of sort of plain and old on the outside and very elaborate and decorated on the inside. And if you're not too tired afterwards, you can also go up. You can pay a couple of euros and you can go up 300 steps, which is about 90 meters, about 300 feet. And you can go up very much to the top of Old Peter, as it's called by people from Munich. And you can have these amazing views of the city. Hold on. So after all of that history and all of that climbing of those stairs, maybe the next thing we will do on our walking tour is we would have a little snack break. And just at the bottom of Old Peter, really just next to it, you have this Reichhardt bakery where you have these amazing donuts from the region called Krapfen. So there you have the vanilla Krapfen, you have a Schoko Krapfen, you have one with kind of cornflakes. These are big sort of custard filled donuts and they're absolutely delicious if any of you ever go to Munich. And in fact, this bakery has premises in lots of cities in Germany, but it's really nice to get them in Munich. Very, very, very recommended the Krapfen, the donuts from Munich. So now we're going to walk just down the street. We're about 5 minutes away, and we're going to make our next stop on the walking tour. This is the Feldherrnhalle. So that's Feldherrnhalle, if you see it written down there, as it should be pronounced. Again, apologies if there are any Germans in this. I am obviously not a fluent German speaker, but I'm doing my best to sort of share some pronunciations a little bit here. So what are we looking at here? What is this building? It's actually quite an uninteresting, boring building, right? It comes from 1840, and it was a kind of memorial in a sort of the style of the big memorials in Florence. It was a memorial commissioned by Ludwig I, who was one of the kings of Bavaria, to commemorate the Bavarian army. Okay, nothing very special, nothing particularly interesting, but something happened here in 1923, which makes it very, very interesting if we want to think about the history of Munich. And what happened here in 1923 was something called the Beer Hall Putsch. I don't know if any of you ever heard of that, or if you even heard the word putsch before. Putsch is a kind of uprising. I'm not talking about a small dog, that's a pooch, but a putsch is a kind of uprising. And in 1923, there was a very famous putsch here that spilled out of a beer hall and tried to take control of the government. And it was led by none other than Adolf Hitler. Okay, so 3 years before, he had started sort of doing political organizing work around sort of extreme right ideas. He'd been involved in sort of setting up what would later become the Nazi Party. Okay, that was mostly on a sort of platform of hostility towards foreigners, hostility towards Jews. And in 1923, he had kind of stirred up a sort of rebellion here. Okay, and there was this big uprising. They tried to take control. They tried to have a revolution, a coup d'état. And it didn't work. He got arrested and he got sentenced to 5 years in Landberg prison. Okay. Now, what do you think this did for him? This kind of immediately made him a bit of a martyr, right? So people on the extreme right, they felt like he was becoming a martyr for their cause. So it actually gave him a lot of popularity. And he managed to get out of prison the year later. While he had been in prison, he wrote his famous autobiography, Mein Kampf. Okay, I don't know if any of you would ever have read it. I can strongly advise you not to read it. I had to read it twice because I wrote my master's about Hitler and his relationship to the printed word and to book burning and this kind of stuff. So I had to read it a couple of times. It's not a good read, and obviously full of really, really vile thoughts about the world. But anyway, they had this putsch in 23. In 24, he got out of prison. And in 32, the National Socialist Party, they won the election. So they got elected in Germany with quite a big percentage of the vote. They had 36% of the vote, okay? So it feels important to say that the Nazis didn't spring to power in some kind of dramatic revolution that no one could have predicted. They were voted in through normal democratic channels. And there was almost nowhere where they were as strongly voted in as Munich, which was very, very pro-Nazi. It was a very, very conservative part of Germany. And in that election, which was in 36, in 32, they really preyed on a kind of demoralized and fearful middle class who felt like Germany had really been weakened after World War I with the Treaty of Versailles, felt like it was being under threat from foreigners, felt like it was being kept on its knees by the powers that be. And they wanted to sort of reestablish Germany as this great power, okay? So I tell you all of this looking at this picture because it's quite shocking what I'm going to show you next, but this is what it looks like today. And then if we go back in time, not that long, this is what it looks like, okay? So these huge swastikas, I find it very shocking to look at these images now. I don't know if you do, but I find it very shocking to see them like that. And then if we look at this next one, this crowd of people doing the Hitler salute, the Sieg Heil, also very upsetting. This next one, In fact, the Feldherrnhalle, it became a place for the Nazis to commemorate the lives that were lost during the beer hall putsch. So those people that participated in this uprising and then died, they became martyrs, obviously, to the Nazi cause. And so this was a big rallying ground for that. In fact, in the denazification process of Munich, it's been a real problem that neo-Nazis often want to come and try and, commemorate certain events, and they come here to the Feldherrnhalle. And it's been a real thing for the Munich city to try and eradicate it. This next picture, this is in Marienplatz. This is during a Nazi rally. And then this last one I find really intense. It's in Maximilianstrasse in Munich. And there you can see, third from the right, there he is, Adolf Hitler. Okay. And I think this is Hess next to him. So you can see how intense it is to imagine, Munich under Nazi control. And in fact, after World War II, they had to have this very long process of denazification, okay, because there was so much iconography, so much Nazi sort of image making all over the city, and they had to get rid of a lot of that stuff. Actually, today, if you walk around, really often you can see little brass corners on buildings where there once was a plaque, or little poles where there was once a Nazi flag, or places where a swastika has been engraved in and it's been filled in. The city's really full of these traces from another time. One of the really shocking ones that's interesting to see is that in the modern art gallery, in fact, Hitler hated modern art, right? He thought it was degenerate. And so one of the things he did in Munich was that he built this museum, an art museum, to showcase, strong Aryan traditional art. And after World War II, when they were denazifying Munich, they thought that, as a kind of sort of bitter joke, that maybe what they could do is they could re-give this gallery to the art that Hitler hated so much, which was modern art. So it became the Modern Art Gallery. And actually, when you go there and you visit it, as you walk in, you're standing underneath this colonnade with these pillars. If you look up, the tiles on the ceiling, you can still see swastikas in the motif. So it's one of the few places where you can still see swastikas that have not been removed since World War II. So we're going to come around the corner a little bit and we're going to look at this building, which some of you may have heard of, which is called the Hofbrauhaus. It's about 500 years old. And since the 20th century, it's probably been the most famous beer hall in the world. Okay. So they've been making beer here, like I said, for nearly 500 years. And it also has a beer hall, which is a place where you would go to drink beer traditionally. They still make beer here in accordance with the law from 1516, which was in fact the world's first food law. It's still in place. And I don't know how much you know about the history of beer, but I think beer, where it came from, its origins was, a drink that was made. People felt like the alcohol, and we're right in thinking that the alcohol in beer was killing the germs that was in dirty water. So actually, beer for a lot of people in the Middle Ages, for example, they weren't drinking it just to relax after work. They were drinking it instead of water, because water was in fact quite dirty. So they had this real beer drinking culture, and they've been making it in the Hofbrauhaus since 500 years. Everything apart from the actual beer hall itself was destroyed in World War II and had to be really built back up again. And it's had some very, very famous patrons over the years, some very famous clients. Mozart used to drink here when he lived in Munich. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, you might remember from the Russian Revolution, used to drink. He didn't live here. He lived in Munich briefly before World War I, and he would drink in the Hofbrauhaus. But maybe its most famous local drinker was the person who painted this watercolor of the Hofbrauhaus. Don't know if you can see the name in the bottom right-hand corner there. Yes, that's right, Adolf Hitler. So Hitler was a big drinker in the Hofbrauhaus. Okay, he liked to drink there. And it was actually there in 1920 that he held the first meeting of what would go on to be the Nazi Party. 2 years later, it was also where the SA, who were kind of the street fighting division of the Nazi Party, it's also where they were formed. Inside, you can see it looks like this, these big, grand dining halls. Here's another, this is the sort of ground floor. And it's really this beer hall culture. I think maybe when we talk about Oktoberfest in 5 minutes, I'm going to come back and talk about beer hall culture. But one thing I will just point out for now is that you notice that there aren't individual tables. There's big benches and big tables. So a big part of beer hall culture is that you all sit together. So you sit with strangers. You don't just sit with your friends or your family. It's a very sort of collective experience. So we've had our little refreshing drink. We're nearly at the end of our walking tour. We're going to walk just around the corner to the Viktualienmarkt. looks like a kind of long, complicated German word. Actually, it comes from the Latin word victual for food. And so if Marienplatz around the corner was the grain market, this, since the 19th century, was the food market. And actually this photo is kind of neat because you can see the beginning of the food market. But in the background, you can see first the white tower of Alt Peter, where we climbed up earlier, all those stairs to look at the view. And behind that to the right, the tower of the old town hall, okay, where we were looking at that sort of moving clockwork figure. So we're here in the Viktualienmarkt, which is a very famous food market, a really nice place to while away the rest of our afternoon in Munich. And if we look in the very middle, we can see this blue and white thing, which is the maypole. So the maypole is a really traditional part of Bavarian culture. It's quite interesting. I think personally it's a hangover from pre-Christian traditions, from pagan traditions. Often in the beginning of Christianity in Europe, you had this thing where the missionary Christians, they would see aspects of indigenous culture, which is mostly pagan, and they would kind of translate them into their culture in order to make their Christianity more palatable. The most classic example would be in Scotland and Ireland with the Celtic cross, with the circle behind it. That the Christians saw that the Celts worshipped the sun, and they thought, well, if we stick the sun on the crucifix, that's going to make the crucifix a lot more believable as a sort of figure for these people. And so the maypole in Bavaria is one of them. But it's been a pagan celebration the beginning of May since forever. And it's become really a part of this sort of quite rich, quite traditional Catholic culture in Bavaria. And so basically towards the end of April, there's a team of people. It's a very, valued role. They go into the forests near Munich. They search for the right pine tree. They have to choose the right one. They cut it down. They bring it to Munich. They paint it, decorate it, and then it gets hoisted up by hand. And then there's a brass band. Everybody gets very drunk, and there's a big party. There is also quite a funny tradition around the maypole, which is that it's traditional in Bavaria to try and steal the maypole from your rival towns. So if you steal their maypole, that means you've got like bragging rights. You've got the honor. And often there are situations where they have a kind of ransom money, like people have to, they have to pay or they have to provide certain services one town to another in order to get their maypole back. But there's a whole kind of code of honor about how you can steal it. Like, for example, you can't cut it. It has to be removed fully. And in fact, there's a very funny, famous example from, I think, 2004, which is when there was a town in Bavaria where they stole the other maypole with a helicopter. Because in fact, you imagine the bigger they are, the harder they are to steal. That's why you want to make them so big. So it's also a very famous food market, really, really great local food. There's a huge mushroom season because there's lots of forest around, berries. And also there's a really big asparagus season there. They have a big asparagus festival every year. It's kind of white asparagus that they have in Germany. And then there's a beer garden also. So you can have a little drink at the end of your tour. Now that we've been walking around for the last however long, and we've had a look around the center of Munich, maybe we're going to be hungry. And so maybe we're going to eat what in the US often you call a pretzel, what in Germany is usually ein Brezel, or here this particular one, a Laugenbrezel, which is they're kind of soft. It's hard to tell from the picture, but they're not hard like pretzels in the US often are. They're kind of quite doughy inside, and they're salty, and they're the perfect thing to have with a nice cold beer, and then maybe also some Weisswurst. So white sausage. So often I think people imagine these sort of big charred sausages. This is really the most traditional of the Bavarian sausages, a white sausage. And it's veal, so baby cow, usually with some pork and with parsley and various other spices. And they're boiled, they're not grilled. So it produces this kind of raw, fleshy, bizarre looking thing, which actually you don't even eat like a sausage because a lot of them you don't eat the skin. So you take off the end and then you kind of suck it out, or you kind of peel it like a banana, which maybe isn't how people really imagine sausages. But that you eat with a pretzel, with a nice cold beer, and usually with some mustard. If there's any of you that don't eat meat, me personally, I don't eat meat. So I'm always looking for all other alternatives in Germany. There's a whole lot of them. One of the classics is this you get everywhere in Munich, and this is Käsespätzle, like this. And the best way I can think of to describe it is that it's kind of like Bavarian mac and cheese. It's these kind of delicious, hard little pastas with really sort of creamy, cheesy sauce. Very, very, very delicious. Would very strongly recommend any of you to eat them. So that kind of brings us to the end of our walking tour part of the trip. So we've had a good look around the sort of central district of Munich. And now for the last sort of 10 minutes or so, what I wanted to do was tell you about three things which are in and around Munich, which are important things and interesting things relevant to the culture of Munich. The first one is going to be Oktoberfest. The second one is going to be Neuschwanstein, the famous castle. And the third one is going to be Dachau, the concentration camp. So, Oktoberfest. So we're looking at all these people. Every time I looked at this picture while I've been making this presentation, I've been thinking, God, they must have such strong wrists. Imagine carrying that many liters of beer. Maybe they have a sort of wrist workout they do at the beginning of the season. So we are in October just now, and because of coronavirus, we cannot travel. But we're in October, and so we're going to talk about Oktoberfest. It's actually ironic, since about 100 years, it's barely in October now. It's mostly in September. So it's about 2 weeks, the festival. And usually only the last 5 or 6 days are in October. They moved it to September because it's the warmer months. So there's more of a public, more people will come, and that's what they obviously want. This year, I'm sad to say, it was cancelled, as you can imagine. Collective sort of mass dining with thousands and thousands of people, as you can imagine, is not very imaginable in COVID times. Even when we looked at that picture actually of the beer garden, hold on, where was it? I kept thinking, oh God, look at all those people wear their masks. It's kind of it's frightening how fast a picture like that has become shocking. But anyway, Oktoberfest was, of course, cancelled this year. It's a beer festival, one of the biggest beer festivals in the world. It's been going for 210 years, since 1810, when there was the marriage of Prince Ludwig. Okay, and he basically just threw a huge, huge, huge party. All of the beer that's available in Oktoberfest, it's only brewed in Bavaria. Okay, so there's not like sort of international beer stands. It's really controlled. It's very, very licensed. You can only get beer that's from the region, and it can only have the 3 traditional ingredients, which are water, barley, and hops. Nothing else in the beer. It's not cheap either. It's about $12 for a liter. Okay, but that does not stop people. Last year, or the year before last, 7.5 million liters were drunk. Okay. And so the festival, this huge beer festival, happens across multiple big venues. Look, here's one of the big famous ones, the Hippodrome, these huge tents with these long tables. Here's another one. And another one. And so you can imagine it's very, very atmospheric, okay? And people kind of getting drunk for very, very long hours. The scale of it is so big, there's so much drinking that goes on, that in fact there's a lost and found for your children. So there's a kind of area with people to take care of kids for if you lose your kids. And at the end of the night, you can go and sort of collect them. You can be like, mine's about this high, red hair, glasses, and then they'll bring you the right kid. They also, I found this a bit disgusting. I couldn't find a picture that was good for the presentation, but a few years ago, Adidas, like the brand, released a special vomit-proof Oktoberfest shoe. That was the colors of Oktoberfest, but that could, absorb or repel vomit or something like that. So anyway, it's a huge, huge deal. Thousands and thousands of people come into the city every year for it, and they drink really a vast, vast quantity of beer. And then they eat a lot as well. They eat pretzels and they eat sandwiches and they eat what you guys call cold cuts. Look how happy this woman is. Look, you can see how good those pretzels and the sausages must be. She looks really excited to be about to eat. So the next thing I want to talk about is Neuschwanstein. So look, Neuschwanstein. It's a bit of a tongue twister, I have to admit. Neuschwanstein, like that. Neuschwanstein is this totally bizarre fairy tale castle that's about an hour and a half from Munich, that was built by this man, Ludwig II. Take that painting in for a second. Look at his outfit and look at his face. I think it's such an intense painting. Anyway, if we go back, we look at this castle. This is really genuinely, it's known as the kind of Disney castle, right? So it's the castle that most of the Disney castles were modeled on. It's sort of very romantic, and it really it's quite interesting, the story, because obviously a lot of this architecture is pretending to be Romanesque. Do you remember we talked about Romanesque earlier, these squat towers and the conical roofs? It's pretending to be Romanesque, but actually this was built like 130 years ago, 140 years ago. It's not old at all. But the king, Ludwig II, he was really in this kind of quite wild fantasy world where he wanted to live in the Middle Ages. He was really interested in fairy tales. He was a big patron of Wagner, who he was in love with, Richard Wagner, the composer. And so Ludwig II lived this quite strange life, obsessively building these sort of very dramatic castles. Look at this view of it here, all over Bavaria. And he would do things like he would wake up one day and he would he would just command a servant to go to Versailles in Paris to look at how they'd done the gargoyles and then come back and feed back. And he lived quite an eccentric life. He was gay. He was in the closet. We know this now from his diaries. And people generally thought he was kind of quite a strange man, and has maybe exhibited a lot of signs that maybe today we would look at with different eyes, or we would think that were maybe related to mental illness. But he did a lot of things. He was famous for example, in winter, sometimes he would have the table laid out in the snow and he would invite guests to eat. Or in summer, he would wear fur coats, or he would go for long walks dressed up as a peasant and talk to peasants and pretend that he was not the king. Or he did a lot of quite strange stuff. And eventually he was pushed from the throne by his uncle, forced into a mental institution in the 19th century. But he's very adored in Munich. He actually met very mysterious ends. Nobody really knows how he dies. People think he was murdered, and other people say it was a suicide. So Ludwig II, also known as Mad King Ludwig or the Swan King, Google him if you're interested. It's quite an interesting story. So anyway, he built Neuschwanstein. And the last thing that we're going to talk about, and then we're going to be really at the end. I'm sorry, I've already had you for 40 minutes. I'm going to talk for a few more and then I'll be done. The last thing we're going to talk about is the kind of heaviest and the saddest thing, which is the conclusion of some of the events we talked about related to Nazism earlier in the walking tour, and that would be Dachau. So for those that don't know, Dachau was a concentration camp. So it was a Nazi forced labor camp. And here we see the very famous gates into Dachau. The same words were written above many of the Nazi death camps. The words are Arbeit macht frei, which means work will set you free. It's the last thing that people saw going into these camps, which often, obviously was not the case. Work would not, in fact, set them free. So the Nazis got elected in 1932. Munich was their kind of strong seat. And in 1933 already, they opened the first camp, which was Dachau. And so Dachau was really important because Dachau served as a blueprint for the other camps. And one thing which you don't always realize is that, when we talk about Nazi camps, we forget that there's a distinction between concentration camps and death camps. So death camps like Auschwitz, they were made literally just to exterminate people. People arrived there and they were exterminated. Whereas Dachau, they wanted people to work first. And so Dachau was really a big place for munitions. They were making a lot of munitions. And at first it was meant to be just for communists and for priests, sort of dissident priests. And in time, they sort of also added Jews, they added LGBT people, they added gay men. It was just a men's camp. They added Roma and Sinti people. And then eventually they started adding just sort of normal criminals. And this was part of a plan to sort of demoralize the political prisoners by mixing them with people who had committed crimes. Obviously, I need not say that this is a place of enormous human suffering. It's actually a big privilege and an honor that in my job I get to guide people in concentration camps. I think they're very important places culturally for us to visit if we want to think about the logical conclusions of fascism and where this kind of extreme right ideology can lead us and has led us in the 20th century. So I think it's important we don't shy away from them and that we don't look at them and take in really the things that happened in them. Anyway, it opened in 1933, and on the 29th of April, 1945, it was liberated. It was liberated by the Americans. So here's a picture from Liberation Day in Dachau. Now, I could show you, lots of pictures of sort of rooms full of dead bodies and very emaciated looking people, but I'm actually not going to. I made a decision I didn't want to. I think it's enough to tell you. I think you can imagine how strong the images are. And instead, I'll show you a couple of images from the liberation. The liberation story itself was actually quite dramatic in that, just when Hitler knew that the war was over, there were a lot of very spiteful orders that went out just to do damage at the end of the war. For example, famously, when Paris was under the control of the Nazis, but he knew that the war was over, famously, he ordered the bombing of Paris. He said, destroy it, There was a similar thing where they ordered the liquidation of all of Dachau, all of the people that were left here. Himmler was the person in charge of Dachau. He was the Munich city police chief, and he ordered the extermination of all people in Dachau. And actually, I think if the Americans had been a day later, it would have happened. And they arrived, and of the 30,000 people left, only about 10,000 of them could even walk. People were very, very sick, and they were very, very starving. And there had been a huge attempt to sort of escape in the days before, and there'd been a sort of rebellion. All of the leaders of him had been shot. Here you can see quite an amazing, this is after the liberation as well, people looking into a mass grave. This is also in Dachau. And there's one story that I just wanted to share with you just before we end, which is just about the liberation of Dachau, which is a story that I always find particularly touching, which is that Dachau is it's in a small town, you know, there's houses around there. And actually, when the Americans arrived and they found, for example, the crematorium filled with, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of naked bodies stacked up, they were so shocked by what they saw that they wanted to know if it was possible that the neighbors in the surrounding villages had let this happen under their noses or even had condoned it. And so famously, a group of American soldiers went and got a bunch of neighbors, sort of respectable middle-class neighbors, and forced them to come into the camp and go into the crematorium and look at these piles of bodies. And there's quite amazing footage of this, which you see in the film if you visit Dachau, and you can sometimes find them online, but I struggled to find them for this presentation. But if you ever go there, you'll see them in the film. It's quite amazing footage of these middle-class people in their sort of fur coats and spectacles being forced in by these young American soldiers and said, you know, look at this, look at this. This was happening next to your house. It was happening in your name. And for me, this story always raises all kinds of questions about what it means to be a witness to something, or what it means to keep your nose down and pretend that you're not seeing what's happening in your society around you. So certainly when, I imagine a lot of you are maybe older, but certainly when I do this with teenagers, this is quite an important teaching point with them, to talk about what it means to be a bystander in society. Anyway, I wanted to show you these. I would really recommend any of you that ever have the chance to visit Dachau to do so. It's a really interesting learning experience. And then we come back to Marienplatz, which is where we started. And we can see there the view of the new town hall and the Glockenspiel. And I'm sorry, I've been talking for, nearly 48 minutes. Sorry, Mara. But I hope that was interesting, and I hope that I can answer some of your questions if you have any now. But yeah, thank you for listening.
That's awesome, Lewis. It's a hard topic, and honestly, so many people have chatted and sent in notes on Facebook and on Zoom that they are so thankful that you did not shy away from the hard topic aspects. I mean, I know that in this day and age, a lot of times there are countries that would like to change the past, but it's always important to discuss the past to know where to go in our future. So thank you for that. I'm going to continue to take up your time here to talk a little bit about our future virtual tours, because we're going to get into the Q&A in a minute, and I'm going to let Lewis take a second to look at the questions that are coming into play, and we'll address them in a minute. But before we do, I just wanted to flash a little slide up so that you know what's coming up. And it gives you another opportunity if you want to take a screenshot of this, or you want to just put it in your memory, or you can go to my website and sign up for future tours. And then I think I've given Lewis a little bit of time. I want to thank you again, Lewis, for your presentation. I know that if we were in Germany and we were doing that walking tour or any of the other places, you know that information very easily and you could share it with you, but I understand that it's a little bit more work to research and put the slideshow together to show it in a pictorial way. So thank you for your time and energy on that. We're now going to go into our Q&A, and Lewis, if you want to just go to the top of the questions and read the question off before you answer it, so that the people in the audience know what question you're addressing. If you're ready, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Yeah, sure. I am ready. Okay.
You may have to hold that mic, I'm sorry to say, but.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we never have any luck with this microphone situation, do we, Mara? I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. I'm going to try and get through a lot of these. There are 95 of them, but maybe we won't get through all of them, so I'll try and answer some of them. Here we go. This is a really specifically niche question from Lara Lynn Andre. How are lederhosen cleaned? I have absolutely no idea. I just wanted to give the question, say it out loud, because I think it's a really good question. I imagine they'd be steam cleaned, right, if they're made from deer skin. But I have absolutely no idea. Carmel Kraus wants to know, are microbreweries as popular in Germany as in the US? It's a really good question. Yes, they're getting more popular. It depends on the cities, right? And so in big young people cities, yes. I feel like in places like Bavaria and Munich, the beer halls, the old breweries, they're so institutionalized that it's kind of, there's not really a market for breaking in with microbreweries. So it depends where you are. A. Salas wants to know, how old is the city? I think in general, people say 12th century for Munich, 12th century, or the 1200s, sorry. So the 13th century, it was given the right from a duke to have a marketplace, and that was the beginning. Erica wants to know, where is your favorite city in Germany and why is it your favorite? For me, it's got to be Berlin, to be honest. I think Berlin is really, the culture in Berlin I find totally fascinating. This whole division between East and West. Yeah, Berlin I find culturally very, very stimulating and interesting. Devika wants to know, what is the correct season to visit Germany? I don't know if I think there's a correct season. It's a specific way to phrase the question. It depends what you like, I guess. In summer, all over Germany, it can be very hot. So if you like to kind of sunny, sunbathing, swimming in lakes, vacation, I guess summer. Winter, there is a lot of tourism because you have Christmas markets and you have beer halls, and they are quite good at making things cozy. So I think for comfort levels, autumn or spring, and for kind of hot holidays, summer, and cozy winter ones, winter. So kind of any season. Rita wants to know, if we were all together on the walking tour, what is the distance we would have covered? Actually, very, very small. It's quite compact, the city centre. I don't think there would have been a single walk that would have been more than 10 minutes. In total, not very far at all. Margaret wants to know, are the Christmas markets going to open this year? I think so. I read something that said they were going to, I don't know if you know anything about how Germany has handled the COVID stuff, but they've been somewhat predictably very, very on top of it. You know, they did a very good kind of lockdown. They've put in a really impeccable track and trace system with an app that tracks cases. And also in Germany, they have this thing, they're very civically minded, German people. So, if you say like, oh, it could be a good idea to wear a mask, everyone will wear a mask. They're not like the French, like where I live, where people are like, rules, never, we'll never respect them. German people. And so they've been much, much less affected by COVID than any of the other countries around. I mean, they have like a quarter of the cases of the UK, for example. And so I think some of the Christmas markets are going to open up. Someone asks, S-Bahn and U-Bahn, what is the difference? That's the sort of public transport system. S-Bahn is overground and U-Bahn is underground. What is handicap accessibility like in these places, as well as are electronic carts rentable and readily accessible? I haven't seen electric carts. I think in general, Germany is pretty on it with accessibility for wheelchairs and mobility scooters. Munich is a bit of a tough case because it's a kind of medieval city center, old town. And so there's really a huge amount of cobbles, which is always a bit of a nightmare for accessibility. Okay. Erica Shermer asks, the buildings we've seen look pretty old. I thought that much of the cities were bombed out during the wars. Are these rebuilds? Yes. I mean, really overwhelmingly, yes, they are rebuilds. Munich is like a big kind of facade. And some of them, as you will have seen, they were rebuilt pretty authentically. And obviously some of them, something could be damaged and not completely destroyed. So it's not like they're made out of sort of cardboard. Like some of them are pretty, they have their original bases, or they have aspects of the original masonry. But yes, a lot of them are really really reconstructed. Angela says, does this bakery ship to the US? Wow. No, but to be honest, the US, you guys do pretty good for donuts. So I think don't worry so much. Erica wants to know, is Mike's Bikes tours still in operation? I went in 98. Unbelievably, Erica, yes, Mike's Bikes doing well. Daniel wants to know, is vegetarian cuisine widely available in Germany? Yes, it's really amazing for vegans and vegetarians. You'd be shocked to hear that, but it is really amazing. There's a lot of cities in Germany where they have vegan supermarket chains. They're really way ahead of kind of anyone else with vegan vegetarian food. Janet Belena, was the book burning held at Feldherrnhalle? Yes, in Bavaria, in Munich, some of the book burnings were held in Feldherrnhalle. Yeah. Dave Gardner, excellent question. I remember some video of Adolf Hitler with beautiful mountains in the background. Was that Bavaria? That's the Eagle's Nest. I think you got to be talking about the Eagle's Nest, which is en route between Munich and Austria. So it's not so far, but if I remember rightly, I could be wrong. It's actually just across the border in Austria. Debbie wants to know, are reservations needed to go to the Hofbrauhaus? The Hofbrauhaus is a free-for-all. You can walk in there any time of day or night, and you can find a chair. I mean, it's really, you know, part of the culture would be that you wouldn't necessarily make reservations because you'd sit, for example, with people you didn't know. Okay, Patricia wants to know, what was the name of the park where people were in the water? That was the English Gardens, the English Gardens. It's a big park in the center of Munich. Anonymous attendee wants to know, what steps did Germany take to denazify that you think the US could parallel to combat systemic racism? I don't know if I think that they're really comparable. It's very complicated to say that. I mean, I think also the thing is that in Germany, they've had this kind of like, we must talk about it program. You know, it's like that's been the real heavy emphasis since the war is we must talk about it. We must talk about it. We must talk about it. And in that way, we're going to somehow accept what we've done, or we're going to somehow accept that there isn't a single person whose family, you know, literally just 2 generations back, weren't either like really affected by it in a negative way or didn't potentially take part in really unpleasant things. And so I think that with maybe the US's relationship to that kind of stuff, you're talking about a few more generations. So it's a bit easier for people to say, this is not, you know, this is not my people, this is not my family, this happened another time. And so I think that's a big difference. But I think talking about things a lot helps with all of this. Sharon wants to know, is currywurst eaten in Munich or more in other parts of Germany? I don't know if I've ever seen currywurst in Munich. You see it everywhere in Berlin and in more kind of multicultural cities. Bavaria is so, it's very, you know, it's traditional with their things to do with culture. Marie Lavance asks, what if you don't like beer? That's a really good question. If you don't like beer, firstly, you probably wouldn't go to Oktoberfest. But if you were in Munich and you were in a beer hall and everyone was drinking beer, Apfelschorle, which is like apple juice and sparkling water. That's what people drink if they don't like beer. And that's really nice. Have you ever had someone with, this is Susan's question, about being a celiac in Germany, or what it's like to not be able to have gluten? Yes, again, like the vegan vegetarian thing, very, very possible. Good question from Marianne Mayer. Wasn't there an uprising in Dachau where hundreds of the townspeople were killed when they attempted to free people way before the US got there? It wasn't quite as simple as that. It was quite a complex underground resistance network between the inside of the camp and resistors on the outside of the camp. And there was an uprising, like I said, a few days before the liberation, but it didn't work. And they mistimed it. They were like, right, the Americans are super close. Now's the time. And they tried, but it was too soon and the Americans didn't arrive and they lost, and a lot of them were executed. But yes, there was a good link between a resistance network outside and people in the camp. Elaine Donadio has a question. Did any of the neighbors ever admit to being aware of the deaths? Is it commonly believed that they knew? This is a subject that interests me endlessly, okay? Because there's often this discourse, right, that people didn't know what was happening. They didn't know about the you know, that how could they possibly have known? And I think it's interesting. I think there are aspects of that that's true, right? I think people didn't realize the extent of the sort of industrialization of murder that had happened in the Holocaust. Didn't realize that until afterwards. I think that German people didn't realize, French people, you know, nobody really realized until all of the camps had been liberated and people could really see what was happening. But I think on a general level, it's like this thing about people not really knowing what was happening. Personally, excuse my language, I call BS a little bit. If you live in an apartment building and you watch that suddenly and surely all of your neighbors who are not, you know, who are Jews or who are from other countries are slowly disappearing, you know, like, you know that something very bad is happening, especially when they're not coming back. And so I'm a bit wary of trying to say that people really didn't know anything. But I think certainly people didn't understand the extent of the violence that was being done in the Holocaust. Anonymous attendee says, was Bavaria part of East or West Germany? West Germany. Kim asks, what is the name of the film you were discussing? I think it's just called Munich. It's not actually about the bombings in the Olympic Games. It's about the squad that were hired afterwards to hunt down and kill the people who did the attacks on the Olympic Games. I said bombings, but it's not bombings, it was attacks. Missy asks, is Dachau the only camp in Germany? No. In fact, I really tried to get a good image of this for the presentation, but I couldn't find one. People don't realize there were literally hundreds, maybe even 1,000 camps all over Germany and the occupied territories. I mean, really a lot of camps. Dun, dun, dun. Are there any remnants from buildings still standing from World War II days, like the Nazi HQ building? Does it still stand? Yeah, there's tons of buildings that were around. There's tons of buildings that Hitler would have been in and spent time in. Some of his offices are still around in the sort of museums district. Sandra wants to know, can you visit inside the castle that Ludwig built? Yeah, you can. 1.6 million people a year visit it. It's a huge, one of the biggest tourist attractions in Europe. And it's so strange. It's one of the strangest places I've ever been. Like, all of the styles are so mishmashed. Like, you go into his bedroom and it's like this like medieval chamber with a 4-post bed with all these silk drapes hanging. And you go into the next room and there's a false indoor cave with running water in it. It's a very, very strange place. And Kim asks, what was the name of the eccentric king? His name was Ludwig II. Okay. Kerry wants to know, what was the name of the oldest monastery brewery? It's Wiensteffen. So Wien, and then like Stephen, Wiensteffen. Mary, where did Louis say he was living that has a 9 p.m. curfew? In France. I live in France. Bambi says, thank you so much. No, you're welcome. No, this was supposed to be about Germany. What other cities are not to miss? Best way to travel in between them? I mean, there's tons of things. Germany's it's a great country. There's lots of things to visit. Berlin, I really very strongly recommend. Berlin is a really interesting place. Hamburg is a really interesting place. And in terms of traveling between cities, 100% train. The trains are so efficient, so organized, so affordable. Oh, here we go. We got some serious lederhosen responses. Joanne is telling me that maybe, is that links to lederhosen? No, maybe not. Lise is telling me lederhosen are cleaned by hand in a bowl of water using a natural organic soap. Thank you for that. Very interesting, Roberta. Thank you. Roberta says, my cousin was one of the American liberators of Dachau. Later in Massachusetts, organized a program which interviewed and filmed Holocaust survivors. The tapes have been turned into a movie called Soul Witness. Do you know what? Maybe I'll try and find that Soul Witness, but it's something I think about a lot, right? Because I take, in general, groups of North American teenagers, is the sort of main sort of public that I work with, to take to Dachau. And when you think about so many of those soldiers that came from the US that were conscripted, right? And who were 17 or 18 and who grew up in very rural places, like, you think about what that just the impact of that, right? To be 17 or 18 and to grow up in like rural Idaho and to find yourself liberating this camp in Germany, and then to go back to Idaho and have this kind of hero's welcome, having seen everything you've seen. I mean, the legacy of trauma from this period is enormous. Carla, can an English person travel easily around Germany? English-speaking person, yes. People speak a lot of English, and they're very generous. People are very happy to speak English. Vicky, why did you not mention the Frauenkirche? It is so much a part of Munich. Time. We didn't have enough time. I decided to cut it. Sorry. Chantal, any reason why Oktoberfest has gradually shifted towards being celebrated in September? I think to be able to accommodate more people because it's warmer and people are more likely to come, the weather is better. Charles, is public transport easily used by tourists? Yes, public transport is a dream in Germany. It's really very, 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 very well organized. Gluten-free, lots of gluten-free questions. Okay, a lot of these are the same questions. I'm just having a look down. Arlene wants to know what I'm drinking. I've been drinking tea. That's tea. And then this is water. Gotta stay hydrated. Again, another question. Debbie also wants to know, what are you drinking in that big bottle? Do you know what? The first time I drank out of it, I was like, what are they going to think? I should have had a glass. It's water, I swear. Diane, is it true that children have a visit to concentration camp as part of the required studies? I was told that when I visited Germany. Yes, yeah, it is true. Which I think also is like part of this dynamic about talking about things and that being important, is that actually if you make it from a really early age that, you know, talking about things that are difficult is mandatory, it makes them less difficult to talk about. Renee, when I lived in Berlin in the early 2000s, I ran into many Holocaust deniers. Have you come across that elsewhere in Germany? I mean, it's very, 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 very illegal to be a Holocaust denier in Germany and elsewhere, also in France. So no, I haven't come across that so much. Julie, you said the Hofbrauhaus is one of the only buildings that survived the war. Why did it? Maybe you misheard me, or maybe I misspoke. No, it was just that it was destroyed, but the beer hall survived. It wasn't one of the only, but it survived. Which side of the road do they drive on? Asks Barbara. They drive on the right. Thank you, Janet. Eagle's Nest is just north of the Austrian border. That comes back to the question. I like when the people in the thing answer the questions for me. I think I prefer that. Arlene raises an interesting point. Arlene says, my mother's two brothers liberated one of the concentration camps. Upon return, they never ever spoke about it to anyone. I mean, this is one of the things about Holocaust trauma, right, and World War II trauma, is that very often it skips a generation. So I have a lot of friends who are Jews whose grandparents survived the camps, right? And so their grandparents came back and never said a word about it. And that in turn complexed their parents, so the generation in between, who then gave my generation a childhood where they were talking and thinking about the Holocaust a lot. And so I think that's really common. I think a lot of people came back from those experiences, never talked about it, passed the trauma potentially onto their kids, who then passed it on to their kids. Laurie, have you visited the Camp Sachsenhausen outside of Berlin? Yes, actually, it was the first one I ever visited a long time ago. Anonymous attendee asks, preferred currency to be used by tourists? Euros. 100% euros, 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 euros. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, this is nice. People are saying very nice things. Thank you. Okay, I'm getting to, there's a lot of repeated questions. Hold on, I'm gonna have another look through them here. English.
Louis, I saw one that I really like. I don't know if you know anything about it, but it's an interesting question about the Oktoberfest. If Oktoberfest is canceled, what happens with all the beer? You know, sustainable? Does it hang around until the next Oktoberfest? What about the, you know, what about the production of what's going on?
Oh my God, I have no idea. I would be lying. I'd be lying if I tried to answer. I really would be lying. Sorry, I skipped over it because I knew that I'd have to either try and think of a good joke, which I couldn't think about, or lie, which I didn't want to do. So that's why. Thank you, Mara.
We have to find that out.
Donald wants to know, do Germans take 3-hour lunches during the work week? No, I don't think so. I feel like Germans are quite fastidious and quite kind of hardworking. I mean, I live in the very south of Europe where everything closes in the afternoon because people have to sleep. But I think I think in Germany, no, not so much. That one I've answered. What does Nazi stand for? Asks Leslie. I could be really talking nonsense here, but in my head, I have it in my head that basically NASDAP was the acronym for the National Socialist. You know, the full name of the Nazi party was NASDAP, NASDAP, and NAS. I have it in my head that it's linked with that. That's where it comes from the acronym. What is the displayed in BMW Welt? Asks Madeline. Lots and lots of stuff, loads and loads of cars and like engines, and there's lots of cars that you can get into and try. You can't really drive them, but you can see what it feels like to sit in them. There's a little museum, there's a coffee shop. Jennifer wants to know any info on the Autobahn. Yes, it is true, in fact, that there is not a speed limit on the highway in lots and lots of Germany, and that they have a lot less accidents than elsewhere. And this, again, is the civic-minded thing. Germans are very civic-minded. They're really not very individualist, you know, quite collectively minded. Michelle wants to know, do you need to buy tickets to get into the castle? You discussed yes, and it's very complicated. I mean, there's like I said, 1.6 million people visit a year, so you can buy them online or you can buy them there. There's a lot of infrastructure for that. Rosalie, again, best months to visit Germany. Like I said, depends on what you like. Me personally, I think spring and autumn are the best months to visit literally anywhere, because then you can avoid the heat or the cold. Water. No, I'm not drinking wine, or I'm drinking water. Stephanie wants to know, Lewis, what's your favorite Bavarian beer? I'm not a big drinker, but Lowenbrau, like Lion beer, is a really nice one. They have a huge brewery in the center of Munich. It's one of the big classics. Anne asks, is it just Munich that has good beer in Germany, and do they usually serve that much of beer in Germany? I think everywhere in Germany has really good beer. It's just that Munich's really famous for it because they have these very traditional breweries. Bavarian, what is Bavarian cream again, Deborah? I've had this question a lot in realtors, and I feel like Bavarian cream is something that exists in the US, but then I had never heard of it, and people hadn't heard of it in Bavaria. Can you tell me, Mara?
Yeah, we call Bavarian cream, I believe, the cream that's like a light yellow to white color.
Okay.
That's that in the US, at least, that's what we call Bavarian cream.
And is it like vanilla? Does it taste like vanilla?
It does have vanilla in it, yes.
It could just be what you guys call the custard that they have in those donuts.
It is like a custard, right? We have it in our donuts, which you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
I guess the question is, is that the cream that came from Bavaria? Is that why? Are those pastries filled with that type of cream?
I think I have been in this situation in real life, Mara, of trying to answer this complex question, and I think that if I remember rightly from the last discussion, we deduced that in the US y'all call that Bavarian cream. In Bavaria, they maybe just call that cream, and that yes, maybe it is the same one.
So you have no problem talking about the history of Germany, but Bavarian cream stumps you up.
Look, if you knew me as well, I have a real sweet tooth, but I can't answer this more. Anonymous attendee, are there any national parks to hike in? Loads and loads and loads and loads of outdoors and hiking stuff in Bavaria and in general all over Germany. I mean, a very small Google search will give you lots and lots and lots of options. Beth Clausen says, we were eating in a restaurant in Germany and they didn't bring us our bill until we asked for it. Do you know what? Most places they don't do that. In the US, it's really, I find it a bit oppressive. I haven't even finished the meal and they're jumping on the table with the check. I often in the US, I have to ask people to leave me alone a little bit because they're like, you have a sip and they're like, can I freshen that up for you? Like, oh, you know, just, yeah. So no, we have a bit more. I also, like I said before, I live in France, and in France, you have to like fight them to get the check. Really, they want to do everything they can to ignore you for the absolute longest period of time. So yeah, that does not shock me. Cheryl asks, do you have any comments about Nuremberg or Rothenburg? I actually went to Nuremberg and Rothenburg both for the first time last year. Nuremberg, I found so depressing just because what I did there was we just went to the documentation center and the Nazi rally grounds, you know, where they put on these huge Nazi rallies, and it was just so depressing. It's like really, really depressing. Rothenburg is totally beautiful, little medieval walled city. It was really, 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 really nice. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Audrey Brozena, thank you. This is another one of my favorites where someone answers a question for me. Audrey is telling us beer for Oktoberfest is a special beer brewed for the festival. Since it was cancelled, the special beer was not brewed. Thank you, Audrey. Also, Robert adds to that, beer has a short shelf life, so production is decreased. Elizabeth asks, would you recommend biking through Munich? I'd reckon it would be too hilly. No, I think it's great to bike through Munich. I mean, in general, in Germany, cycling in the cities is just super, super, super easy. There's so much good infrastructure for cycling. It's really easy to rent bikes. I mean, in Munich, they have these massive bike parkings where there's like thousands and thousands of bikes. It's not very hilly, Munich. It's quite flat. So yes, I think it's a great thing to do. Kristen Good, my grandfather stole a book from Hitler's library, the Decameron, as an aviator in the aftermath of the war. Oh my God. Do tourists visit the Eagle's Nest, or is it not done today? Yes, a lot of tourists visit the Eagle's Nest. Very popular thing to do. Still very doable. Alexandra adds to our intriguing inquiry into the Oktoberfest beer that it was cancelled quite early in the year, so probably they did not brew the usual amount. Paula asks, Germany, do the German people in general accept responsibility for the plight of the Jews, homosexuals, etc., etc.? I don't know. I guess it's quite a complex question. I guess it depends on the Germans that you're talking to. I think a lot of work has gone in as a society to accepting sort of responsibility for what happened. But for sure, you're always going to have people that don't. Anonymous attendee asked, is train transportation safe, like pickpockets? Yeah, no, I'd say train transportation is very safe. I haven't heard of very many stories of pickpocketing or theft in public transport at all. No. Shelley says, my grandma immigrated from Wilhelmshaven in northern Germany. Is there a lot of tourist attractions in that area? I don't know. I don't know where that is, actually. I'm sorry.
Take about one or two more, Lewis, and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah. There's one of them that hold on. Sorry, I'm scrolling through the same ones over and over again, I think. Oh, Leslie, I really want to look at that Wikipedia link for Bavarian cream that you sent, but if I look in it, I'm going to go out of Zoom.
There's a lot of talk about Bavarian cream.
Thank you. What, in the chat? Someone is asking about passion plays. Do you know much about the passion play in Oberammergau? No, I don't know about the specific passion play. I know a bit about passion play history in Germany. For those of you that don't know, it was a big thing in the Middle Ages, was to organize kind of theatrical crucifixions of Christ in town centers. People would travel from all over to watch them. No, I don't know about the specific one that you're asking about.
It was supposed to play this year, actually, and it only plays several years apart. And because of the COVID restrictions, it was canceled. So that's a big discussion this year.
They still do them, Mara?
Yeah, they do. They do them. Yeah.
What, and someone gets sort of false crucified in a town center?
I don't know the specifics of it, but I do know that it is part of a go-ahead tour.
Oh my God. But you know that in the medieval ones, they were actually crucifying people. That's what's so depressing about it. They would take like criminals and then they would be live crucified for sort of public entertainment. I hope they're not. I hope go-ahead tours aren't doing live real crucifixions.
So they were. It was postponed to 2022.
Okay.
The one that was supposed to go off, I think they're from, they're several months. They allow people to go, and obviously they are productions, right?
Okay. Valerie asked, are there any other products besides donuts, beer, and cars that have originated in Germany and the US has adopted? I'd have to say hamburgers from Hamburg and frankfurters from Frankfurt.
The passion play is every 10 years, and now, it used to go on the zero on the decade, but now that they have to reschedule this due to COVID, it's now going to be 2022. I don't know if it's going to be 2030 again, or if they're going to just keep it 10 years. I suspect they might go back to 2030 and do it on every decade, but somebody else probably knows that. And they can
answer that question. I'm noticing there is a lot of information coming out in this question feed about Bavarian cream, but to be honest, I think we have our most reliable source maybe in Donna Greer, who says, my mother from Munich said that as a child, they always called Bavarian cream vanilla sauce, which could be like a sauce or a thickened. And it's true. You see things called vanilla sauce, but you don't see things called Bavarian cream. So maybe we could say that Bavarian cream is the North American name for vanilla sauce.
Okay,
Greer, maybe you've helped us. My last question. There's just a lot of stuff about Bavarian cream, Mara. Sorry, I'm trying to sift through it to get the last question. Angela, I told my friend who's Germany that I was viewing this, and she told me to pay attention to Saxony. Is that a city, a monument? Sorry to be so lame. You don't have to say sorry. It's not lame. It's a good question. No, Saxony is like it's a region. It's a state in Germany. It's where there's Dresden. Yeah, and also I would agree it's a very interesting part of Germany to visit.
Okay, that's awesome. So we hope that we got through most of the questions. As you can imagine, there are a slew of questions here, and many address the same topic matter, but I think Lewis did a great job on addressing everything that we could in the time that we have. Again, you know, I just want to reiterate, if you are so inclined and you enjoyed this tour, feel free to tip the tour director. You know, people ask what is the appropriate amount. It's personal. You know, we understand if you're having a hardship, lay off the tip. If you feel like it's something that you want to do, by all means do it. We appreciate it, and I'll make sure that the tips get to the tour director. So from here on, we're gonna just kind of wrap up and know that we have another tour next week. We have another tour next week. You could follow me on Facebook at Girl Travel Tours and at my website. But before I go, I think Lewis has one more thing to say. So we're going to go back to Lewis, and then we will say goodnight.
Are we back to me? Can you hear me? Yeah. I just want to add one last thing about Bavarian cream, because here Linda Critchfield has fed in that Bavarian cream, in fact, is an American thing. All right, it's an invention from Boston, based on the vanilla sauce that we eat in Munich.
Well, so far we've heard that it's German, it's French, it's American.
We've heard a lot of stuff.
So probably the term Bavarian cream came about after somebody, you know, after somebody tasted this and came to reclaim it as American, as we do with a lot of things. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day. I'm not going to say good night because a lot of you are not in the same time zone, but please have a good day. I hope you enjoyed the tour, and we will be back and see you with another tour next week. Take care and enjoy. Bye.